You like it? Huh?
Yeah.
Well, I give it to you.
Really? Why?
Well, you see, the last time we met, my behavior, I wasn't polite, and I don't know.
Better. Please. Forget it.
I don't like people who buy paintings as an investment.
Wow. You count me out.
No, I count you in.
I am like 4 hours into my new computer, so I'm also having some...
How's that going?
So far so good. It probably would be smart for me to plug in the old one, but I don't know. You gotta jump out of the nest and hope you fly at some point.
That, you just get on that new horse and hope that it doesn't kill you.
Anyway, let me just say, Guten Tag, wir sind hier, über den Film der amerikanische Freund des großartigen Regisseurs Wim Wenders zu sprechen.
You know what's great about German is I can almost understand it.
Tell what I'm saying.
It's so close. It's
really close.
Yeah.
If you didn't understand my German, what I said was we're talking about Wim Wenders' 1977 film, The American Friend, which is based on Patricia Highsmith's novel Ripley's Game, which was also in the 90s or early 2000s made into another movie called Ripley's Game, which you and I watched together many years ago.
Yeah, and this is the third... I looked this up because I needed to figure this out. It's the third novel in the Ripley chronology, Ripley's Game.
And it has elements of Ripley Underground, which I think is the second novel, because the character Derwatt and the art forgery stuff are all elements from Ripley Underground, which is another movie that we're going to watch next, if we can find it. I think I have a copy of it lying around, but shall we get into a recap of this?
Yeah, totally. So we don't quite get to our main character, Jonathan Zimmerman, right off the bat. There's a whole we meet this Ripley. We meet Dennis Hopper's Ripley. Dennis Hoppering it up is the only way
He's
that
like
I can describe.
40, sort of 70s, medium length hair, a very, very loud blazer, and a very elegant wool coat and cowboy hat, wandering around the streets of Hamburg with high shoulders. It's an elegant silhouette that he cuts.
He looks great, and it made me realize that when the Dennis Hopper biopic or biopic, all pronunciations are legal, is done, and maybe the time for this has already passed, but holy crap, Owen Wilson needs to be Dennis Hopper.
I have proposed that Owen Wilson would make a great Ripley in Weekend at Ripley's, the comedic Ripley. This is almost Weekend at Ripley's, actually.
You're not wrong. With a touch
Jonathan,
of
you want to come over to my Greek mansion and kill some gangsters this weekend? We can drink some coffee while we're at it.
And we'll talk about being friends.
Friendship, man.
Do you want to be friends?
Like real friends? I like, you know what I really like? I really like your picture framing table. It's just a good room. It's got good vibes.
You gave me this,
it's funny because actual Owen Wilson is not that different than Dennis. Is Dennis Hopper Texan? I mean, this Ripley is Texan, and he has a kind of Texan accent and a cowboy hat. At one point, he says, "What's wrong with a cowboy in Berlin?" But yeah, we meet him. We meet him in the midst of this art sort of forgery scheme that's not very well explained. There's an old artist named Derwatt who is portrayed by the director of Rebel Without a Cause. I had it up here. A very craggy sort of white shock of hair, like Andrew Jackson looking cranky artist. All of his scenes are shot in Lower Manhattan, which looks, because of the lighting, a lot like Hamburg, which is kind of interesting. There's a lot of interesting things happening. Everything's kind of beautiful. Everything's kind of 70s. So he's perpetuating some kind of art forgery. Then we go to an auction. Ripley's at the auction. He's trying to drive up the price of this painting. Our main character, Jonathan Zimmerman, is there. He insults Ripley. He implies that he has heard some bad rumors about him. Maybe he sees through his kind of shady dealings. He also notices that the blue color is not correct in the painting. Ripley takes note of the insult. He seems kind of unhappy about it. And then Ripley has a conversation with his friend Raoul Minot, not Reeves Minot, but Raoul Minot, but the same character, who is looking for somebody to do a murder. And Ripley, in a kind of fit of mischief, recommends Jonathan Zimmerman, who he has also heard is dying of a rare blood disease. And so basically they're finding somebody who has very little to lose and would never be suspected of a murder because he has absolutely no entanglement.
Yeah. And Minot makes contact with Zimmerman and proposes the murder on the metro, which, you're sort of like, okay, yeah, loud, transient, not a bad place to talk about a murder. So many trains in this film. Lots and lots and lots of trains. And basically, Minot is like, we want you to go to Paris. We need you to kill someone. We're going to pay you 250,000 Deutschmarks for it. You're going to be able to support your wife and family. After you die, you'll be able to enjoy your life, what you have left of it. And then there's kind of hatched this sort of bizarre double cross where Minot convinces Zimmerman that there are doctors who can help him more in Paris, and that his leukemia is actually getting quite worse right away, even though Zimmerman's doctor is like, no, there's nothing wrong. Your condition hasn't changed. I should know better than anybody else. But a lot of this film is about the ability to play on a desperate conscience and to get that conscience to kind of snowball into desperate action. Zimmerman goes to Paris. There is some real procedure done at the American hospital in Paris with like what appear to be real doctors and real paperwork. That is where Zimmerman is given a gun and sent to the subway to kill this other putative gangster. Minot says that this guy is a criminal, and because of the entanglements, maybe he is. Maybe that was just a lie to get Zimmerman to do it. But Zimmerman, after a whole bunch of very guilty conscience, overcomes that fear and does the murder, and flees back to Hamburg and collects not 250,000 Deutschmarks, but 97,000 Deutschmarks instead.
And then Minot is like, you want the rest of the money? I need you to do another murder. And the other thing that happens in the in-between is that Ripley comes over to Zimmerman's place. Maybe he's feeling guilty. Maybe it's a little bit unclear. And he wants to get a picture framed, but the two strike up what appears to be a genuine friendship. So Ripley has set up poor Zimmerman. He put him in this difficult situation with his friend Minot, but then you get the sense, he likes this guy. Zimmerman also apologizes for the insult, so you kind of have the sense that they're becoming friends. So then Zimmerman sets out to do the second murder, again, kind of put up to it by Minot. He's sort of desperate. This is going to be a lot harder. This time, our sense is this is a rival gangster faction, and Minot is trying to get these two rival gangster factions to get into some kind of gang war. It's all very obscure. This is going to be a much harder murder because the gangsters involved, there's several of them. They're not on a metro train. They're on a overnight destination like Eurail type train. Beautiful. So there's a moment where the murder is about to happen, but Jonathan Zimmerman is seen by one of the gangsters, and it looks like the jig is up, but Ripley comes out of nowhere and helps him out, and the two of them in a very wonderfully tense scene involving close quarters and garrots and throwing gangsters out and a like young prostitute with drugs and some other elements. Essentially, they carry off the murderer. There's two of them effectively, and their bond is strengthened, and they go back to Hamburg. And then pretty shortly after that, we get the sense that Minot has been found out by the gangsters. He's desperate. He's nervous. Jonathan figures this out, calls Ripley and says, I think they're on to us. And Ripley's like, come to my house. We'll make a stand together. And then there's this kind of like Ripley and Jonathan's last stand at Ripley's house, which is this like semi-abandoned mansion on a hill in Hamburg that is kind of neoclassical in its architecture. It's beautifully shot, but without going into too many details, they get the better of the gangsters who have in fact showed up to kill them. And then they have to dispose of the evidence. And just as they're about to do that, Jonathan's wife shows up.
Yeah. And she has been suspicious this whole time that Jonathan has kind of like headed off to Paris, and it's very clear that he's not telling her everything. And she is beginning to, lose patience with that. And it's tragic because he doesn't want to tell her, because of course you probably don't want to tell your unsuspecting wife that you've gotten, roped into some gangster shit while you're dying of leukemia and your 5-year-old son is sleeping in the next room. And I think in kind of a really elegant twist, she thinks it's something else at first, but then we get to kind of see her realize that actually, oh, whoa, we're sort of in over our head. And Zimmerman kind of asks her to help, kind of implores her to kind of take part in this.
It's actually Ripley.
Ripley asks, I couldn't remember at the particular moment.
Well, Zimmerman kind of nods in agreement, but Zimmerman's sort of out of it at this point. And Ripley is like, kind of comes to her and is like, all right, I know you're angry at your husband, ma'am, but we're in a lot of trouble here. So we're going to need you to drive,
overnight
the car,
to
the
Netherlands.
To the Netherlands, where we're going to dispose of the evidence.
And they do. They drive overnight. Ripley disposes of the evidence by lighting this particular ambulance on fire. The mobsters came in an ambulance. That was their cover story. Ripley, in this kind of like manic episode, lights the ambulance on fire, seems to be particularly overjoyed. And
he
Zimmerman
plays the boom game.
That's right. Yes, he does play the boom game. Boom. Zimmerman uses this moment to try to extricate himself from this relationship and this situationship. And
he would get away with it. He would have gotten away with it, but
he dies a few minutes later.
Maybe of a heart attack, maybe the blood disease.
He acutely perishes of leukemia.
It's never said to be leukemia, but yeah, it's something with the blood.
Yeah,
we don't know. Is it a heart attack? Was the disease real all along? Was it fake? That's never explained. And then the last shot is Ripley, again, Dennis Hopper in his sort of manic, is sort of like underneath a pier in the Holland saying, well, we made it, Jonathan. We made it. And it's beautiful. The whole movie is beautiful. If the recap isn't making a lot of sense to you, that's okay. Yeah. Because the movie, at least in the sense of sensical plot, does not make a lot of sense. It might make other kinds of sense, I would say, but
it makes a real German expressionist kind of sense. Like, we're in the world of expressionism. Things stand in for ideas. That's usually what we're doing with expressionism. It's sort of like symbolism, like in the flesh. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at. Like this very sort of like, there are these large ideas that are constantly being gestured at. It is an intensely literary film, just in the way that it handles figurative language. Like, upon watching it again, like there are moments, the little bedside lamp that Daniel has is a train, and then the forged painting is a train.
Yeah.
Jonathan is a framer.
Yep.
There are many, many instances of Jonathan holding a frame with himself in it. Like,
Yep.
and that little moment of the shot lingering on Daniel's bedside lamp morphs into Ripley's mansion, and like the details of the colonnades on the mansion almost perfectly pick up the cow catcher on the front of the train. It's in like, it is an intensely beautiful and incredibly visually scripted film. And just for that, it's worth watching. But it really does reward a second watching.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. And so tell me, maybe talk just a little bit more about, this was my I've watched it now 3 times. So I'd watched it once, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And then I watched it for a second time a week ago, and then a third time over the weekend. Because I first of all, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And to me, it rewards a second watching. It rewards a third watching. So what was the difference between the first watch and the second watch for you?
You know, I watched it the first time late last week, and then watched it again over the last couple of days. And my first impulse upon watching it last week was like, I don't like this. And I think I had really struggled to figure out what the heck was going on in the very first first 30 minutes. Like, you're just dropped into this plot about a forgery. There's some suggestion of that plot. The fake artist's name is Dervat, but the actual character's name is like Pogosh or something. He even says that to Ripley. He's like, that's my real name. And I was like, what? Why is this important? And then we get the painting and we're off to the auction. And then this new character, Jonathan Zimmerman, is just like talking to this tall, very curly haired character who I think is a famous actor, like a contemporary famous actor whose name I cannot remember. But I was just like, I don't understand what is happening. And I hadn't quite settled into the sort of odd dialogue and Dennis Hopper's even odder, like, personalization of Ripley, that I was just like, I really don't get this. And it really did feel like those first few times that you get a new Tom Waits album and you like the old Tom Waits stuff and the new stuff is completely different. And there's like a lot of like ambient sound and noise and scratching and trivia. And you're just like, what is this? Then as the plot began to get clearer, basically as we sort of dispense with all the exposition and move into the actual plot and the action, then I began to enjoy it quite a bit more. And I particularly enjoyed the scene where Jonathan is trying to get up his courage to do the first murder. There's almost no dialogue. It's incredibly tense. With really just kind of 3 characters, sort of like in this very odd subway-based cat and mouse game, with like Jonathan following his quarry, Jonathan's gangster watcher kind of following him to make sure he does it. And then just these wonderful shots of like the German surveillance system in the metro of watching Jonathan and then watching him run away, which he was not supposed to do. And it cleared up for me, but still there were lots of questions like, what is happening in Paris with these doctors? Is this fake? On a second watching with a lot more of that information there, I was like, I really enjoy this. Because then I felt like I could settle into the craft of the film. There's this great early moment when Zimmerman decides he needs to go and see his doctor, and he like runs to the Metro building. And then there's this shot of him just like running down like MC Escher escalators into the bowels of Hamburg. And you're just like, this is great. Like, this is really good.
I think that the key to this movie is deciding you're okay with the plot not entirely making sense. Mm-hmm. But what it's trying to do well is to feel the way you might feel if you were in a kind of thriller scenario. And that's like, in a thriller scenario, you wouldn't know why Minot was implicated by the gangsters. You wouldn't know what his plot was. You would never figure out whether your illness was real or not. Like, things would not be explained, right? And I think I want to play you my first show and tell. Sure. And most of what I have prepared is show and tell, because I really think this is a movie about feeling. It's about how it feels. And, you know, one of Wim Wenders' themes is isolation. But it's another one of his themes is also friendship and sort of goodwill. And one of the things I think is interesting is this movie was originally going to either be called Ripley's Game, which he didn't like. His second title was Framed, which would have been okay, interesting.
Too on the nose.
Right. And then I think it was shortly after this scene was filmed that they settled on the actual title. So I'm going to do a screen share, and hopefully...
The frame that I'm looking at is Jonathan holding a frame with the bottom not yet, with everything not yet put together.
He's in his shop, and the frame is framing him, but not quite put together. One thing I'll just say is that this is at a moment where Ripley and Jonathan don't know each other, and I think the last time they interacted, Jonathan was rude. So here we go again.
Great music in this whole thing.
Music's amazing. So Ripley's in the shop.
Oh.
He's got I love his coat.
He's just being normal, but the music makes it not normal. And now he's picking up things off of Jonathan's desk. He's stamping the receipts. He's just causing mayhem.
Yeah. He's I think he's doing what an actor would call interacting with the space. But he's also, I think what his performance is giving is waiting somewhat awkwardly. Jonathan sees him, and Ripley is found.
Too. Oh, God.
He just briefly looked like James Franco, I thought, that smile.
Yeah, I could see that. You know, one of the great things about this film is the prevailing normalness of Zimmerman set against the outlandishly strange Tom Ripley.
Yeah.
Mein Deutsch ist sauschlecht. Machen Sie mir einen Ramen?
Ramen?
Ramen.
Well, you can speak English.
Das ist gut.
Well, I suggest...
Zimmerman's going to grab a sample frame.
Just one? Yeah?
Oh. Compliments the picture. How long is it going to take?
2-3 days, yeah?
That's fast. Gardner told me that you were a good craftsman. I admire that. I've always wanted to be able to make something with my hands. But, well, some people have it and some people don't.
May I show you something?
The photo has two different aspects, so if you move it, you get a little animation. Yeah, Jonathan says, why don't I give it to you?
Yeah.
Well, I give it to you.
Really? Why?
Well, you see, the last time we met, my behavior, I wasn't polite. I don't know.
Better. Please. Forget it.
I don't like people who buy paintings as an investment.
Well, you count me out.
No, I count you in.
So
I'll be back one of these days.
I think this is the scene that the movie hinges on. Because I think this is the moment where these guys realize they like each other.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that this scene inspired the name, The American Friend, because of the chemistry between the two actors.
Yeah.
That Bruno Ganz and Dennis Hopper, there's this like they're doing this kind of like secret smile with each other. That's like they're both in on the same joke, and I don't know. I'm curious if the scene actually influences the plot, but it definitely, I feel like, influences I wonder if it's the sort of thing where they discover something in the performance and then the director changes the story to match that. I think that's the kind of thing that could have happened. But whether that happens or not, to me, the thing that makes this movie enjoyable, in spite of the visuals, is just these guys are having this misadventure. And in fact, Ripley has played a pretty cruel joke on Jonathan. But then he feels bad about it and tries to make it up to him. And I think what kind of holds it all together is just this friendship between these two men. It's an unlikely friendship, and it's strange, and it's an interesting variation on the Ripley myth. But I think it's somewhat consistent too, because I think that Ripley, even though he's amoral, does want to be liked and does have emotions and regard for other people in sort of all the Ripley stories. And he's I think that what makes him sort of an interestingly unpredictable character is that sometimes he'll do nice things out of just basic human reasons, and then meanwhile he'll be committing a murder or something like that. But I don't know. I'm curious what you think of that, and also what you notice in the scene that maybe I'm not seeing.
Well, like the thing that I love about the scene, I don't think it's quite that both of them are in on the joke. I think that Bruno Ganz, I think Jonathan Zimmerman is not conscious of a joke happening. I think Bruno Ganz is earnestly wanting to make amends for some prior bad behavior and enjoying the regard of this American who seems to be a nice guy.
Yeah.
And as I'm watching the scene, it feels to me that Ripley is trying to find the thread of a joke in it.
Yeah.
And so there's this very odd mismatch of Zimmerman being entirely earnest and Ripley sort of trying to figure out how to be earnest. But it's not who Ripley is. Like Ripley is, there's this wonderful, it's not this scene. It feels like it could be the scene where I think Zimmerman asks Ripley, what do you make? And Ripley has something, it's this great, he goes, I make money.
In a way that's self-deprecating, right? And sort of like, I make money.
Yeah, it's sort of a tawdry kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it works in both directions because like Zimmerman needs money and like probably would want a little bit more of that. But I think the scene is just, I think you're right. It's fantastic. And it does have this sense of them discovering their characters in it. And Ripley kind of wandering around and sort of just weirding it up, I think is, as much as this movie is about Zimmerman's plight, and this kind of leads into my next question about Ripley's character, is that I think this movie is actually about the development of Tom Ripley. And so we've now, I mean, it's so funny. We still have not yet considered the Anthony Minghella film, but we've both seen it, and we know we know Matt Damon's version. We've seen Steve Zalian's version. We've read the book. We watched Purple Noon. How is this Ripley like different? What was your experience of Dennis Hopper's Ripley?
Well, so I think part of what's going on here is a roundabout answer to your question. I'm going to play a clip from the movie Easy Rider later.
Right on.
Because I think that part of what Wim Wenders is doing is putting in a lot of references to other films, and especially American films, and especially American mythic films. So one of the very first shots we see is Ripley looking out at the river at Hamburg, and he's recording a journal with himself. And he says, "This river reminds me of another river." And then he starts singing, "The river flows, it flows to the sea. Wherever the river goes, that's where I want to be. Flow, river, flow." Which is the theme from the movie Easy Rider, which Dennis Hopper directed and starred in. And I think in that moment, I think we're getting that this character is both Tom Ripley and the totality of Dennis Hopper, the actor. That he's meant to be a kind of combination, and that he both exists as Tom Ripley, but he has Dennis Hopper's sort of like reincarnated memories from his Easy Rider character. I think that's the implication. And there are all these references. So, you know, a lot of the music in Easy Rider was written by Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's birth name is Robert Zimmerman. Our protagonist is Jonathan Zimmerman. The actor who plays Derwat is Nicholas Ray, who was the director of another American mythical movie, Rebel Without a Cause. This Ripley, Dennis Hopper's Ripley, wears a cowboy hat and speaks in a Texas accent. And one of the first things you see him do is pull a revolver out and he's like, "I ought to blow your head off." You know,
so great. He literally says, "Freeze, mister."
"Freeze, mister."
I was like,
"Back out nice and slow. Show me your hands. I ought to blow your head off."
Like,
the only reason I don't do it is I'm worried about the neighbors. Yeah, and you're like, what the fuck is this? But also, Wim Wenders was a huge fan of Patricia Highsmith in the Ripley novels, too. And it's not like he's just using Ripley, the character, in this particular plot as an excuse to hang Dennis Hopper. It's like he's merging the two mythoses into one. And he's doing something very similar to... It's like if we were making a movie about family drama and the first scene was set in a cherry orchard.
Yeah, totally right, exactly.
Or it's like if we were doing a movie about a character who has a dilemma and spends most of the film in existential uncertainty, and he lives on Elsinore Drive.
Yeah, totally.
You know, which if you don't know, is Elsinore is the castle in Hamlet, the great story about uncertainty and hesitation and confusion and existential dread. And I think your experience at the beginning of the movie is a thing that sometimes happens when you don't have a guide to those things. Like the cherry orchard, a lot of things like that are not that fun if you don't get the references right away.
Totally.
And I think that if you're attenuated, and I'm someone who's like, for me, like the Birds and Easy Rider and Dylan are sort of like in my DNA. And I'm like, oh, he's talking about Easy Rider. You know, I'm picking that up. But if you're not attenuated to those references, as I often am not when I'm reading a poem or reading a play or something like that, it's just less fun. And you kind of need a guide to bring you into it, or you need the experience of like what you had, which is seeing the whole thing and then being able to step back and watch it again. Yeah. So I think part of my answer to your question is this Ripley is this kind of like mythic uber character that combines Tom Ripley plus Dennis Hopper's filmic persona. I think that's part of it. But then I also think part of it is that at one point, Ripley stands up on, is it like the Roosevelt or the East Side Expressway on a Jersey barrier? And he's like, I'm confused. And I think that Ripley is confused about whether he wants to be a gangster or whether he wants to be because he likes art. What's the one thing we know about Ripley's character is he's always interested in art. But how does he choose to interact with art? He knows he's not a good painter. The one thing he knows he can do with art is forge it.
Right.
Or do crime stuff with it. And I think he's kind of disgusted with himself about that. I think he's like, I figured out this way to make a living forging art, but that's really not honorable. And this guy, Jonathan, he could tell that the painting is off. He could see through me. He could see through my forgery. He sees the real me, and that Ripley actually kind of admires that. Well, I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, because he wants a touch of Zimmerman's innocent everyman quality. Like that's one of the first things right before he goes out on his like balustrade overlooking the river. He's making that. He's recording the journal, and what's so wild is we don't hear Dennis Hopper's voice as if it were just out in the world. We're hearing the crackly tape.
Yep. Yeah,
and like,
it's interesting.
And, you know, that sort of gets to what you're saying about Wim Wenders' kind of project here, is that it's sort of cinema verite, and it's also like wildly elusive, and there's like so many references and stuff like that. And the first thing that Tom is saying is he's basically like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like the mask has become the person. Yeah. And I think a lot of this film, because like, have you seen Perfect Days, the most recent Wim Wenders film? No. I'm not going to spoil it because it's wonderful, but similar to this film, it's like the Hemingway iceberg thing. You become conscious of the plot elements and the things that are driving the action forward in little snippets. And when they do sort of gather their full narrative weight, you're like, oh shit. There's like a real like emotional reveal that I think this movie pulls off as well, primarily because of Jonathan Zimmerman's wife and the actor who plays her, who is great.
She's great.
And she does such an incredible job of basically being the straight woman in this play and film, and giving the film an emotion. Like she is the tie to sort of like, come on, Chris, you can get to this phrase. Not emotional, but she's the moral. She is the moral like grounding of the film. And I think that a lot of this is that Tom doesn't know who he is, and he wants some of Zimmerman's sort of sense of who he is, and he sort of sucks Zimmerman into his world, and Zimmerman's wife is the thing that rescues him. But because, you know,
not entirely.
Well, no, but then he does, and then he has to like there is no other ending.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
Exactly right,
and so is Jonathan. And well, what's also great about that is that like objectively, we should not like Ripley because he kind of ruins Zimmerman's life, but there's this way in which Zimmerman seems okay with it all, and I find this Ripley, of all the Ripleys I've ever seen, the most likable. Yeah. And I think part of it is that, you know, he does turn up at just the right moment to kind of save the day when Zimmerman needs him the most, but also there's this like innocence to his regard for Zimmerman that just is so compelling, and I think Hopper plays it brilliantly. And you know, like there's just these moments where the two of them are together, like when they're pouring the coffee, and they're just like, "Yeah, we did it. We knocked those gangsters out. Oh, this is great. Now we're gonna take a road trip to the Netherlands and blow up an ambulance."
They do a word problem about. They do a math word problem about how far apart the bodies are that they threw out of the train.
Yeah, like, and I think a lot of that's meant to be, you know, the joy of survival, right?
Yeah,
like,
of course.
You know, they've been through. It's like soldiers laughing about, you know, the trenches. And all that feels very realistic. I feel like that's what it would be like. You would be incredibly terrified and confused, and then when you realized you survived that situation, there would be this giddiness and joy. And be like, yeah, let's make some Folgers, and like, you know, pour it into our 70s thermos and go on a road trip, you know. And that it's weird because the plot makes no sense, and yet this feels more realistic than most thrillers. I think it's because it just dwells in these little momentary moments that feel like verite. They do. And also part of it is like, you know, I took a trip to Luxembourg when I was 2, which was right around the time that this movie is set. There's something about the look of Hamburg that I feel like I know deep in my soul, you know, the colors, and even, you know, the metaphor where they're both living. The Zimmermans are living in this apartment block that you can tell is probably going to be knocked down and replaced by modern buildings. And it's like the last one to go. And it's right on the river or the bay in Hamburg. And it's by the water. And it feels like it's surrounded. It's this sort of nostalgic surrounded fortress that's existing in a world that's too complex. And all the shots of Zimmerman are like that. He's being framed. He's in the weird stairwells. He's in the maze of a subway system, you know, and he's on this quest, and it never quite makes sense plot-wise, but you feel it, and it works really well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the central tension that drives the film forward is that, like, Tom Ripley doesn't really know how to be a human. Like, and I think that Hopper does that so well. Like, just this sense of him, like, he's kind of an alien. And that's sort of, and Ripley, the character, is kind of an alien. And I think that when we see him portrayed in a really great way, that's what we get. And Zimmerman is like 100% human. He is such an everyman. I mean, just his casting, he's sort of brown-haired, brown-eyed. He's got just a great basic mustache. He is so normcore. Like,
yeah, he's like if you were a witness and you saw him and then somebody said describe him, you'd be like, I think he had a mustache. Other than that, just kind of normal.
Yeah, just totally normal. He's probably 5'9", you know, like something
dark
like
hair.
that.
Yeah. Not fat, not thin. You know,
I think he was wearing a Patagonia like button top, like you know, just like insert basic whatever.
It might have been plaid. Yeah, exactly. He's very, very normal, and but also there's something very vulnerable and likable.
Oh my God,
about him
I mean, that's the
too.
thing is he's vulnerable, and Ripley has so much armor. But I think what we get to see in this film is like Tom Ripley desperately wanting to ditch the armor. And that's why he seems so alive in this friendship with Zimmerman. And it's kind of heartbreaking. And Zimmerman has to get away from him. We totally get that. But it's heartbreaking for Ripley when Zimmerman abandons him at the very end. And like, you know, and like the tragedy of Ripley is that he cannot connect with other humans. And he wants to, but he doesn't.
He seems in the very last moment to kind of accept that, or at least he gets it. He's like, you know. But of course, poor Jonathan is dead at that point. But it seems like he's like, all right, well, you know, I guess you had to do that. If you wanted to live your life with your wife and your kid, like you kind of need to. I'm not good for you. I get it. Can I do my second show and tell for you?
Yeah, totally.
This is kind of long. I think it's. So this is roughly the last 4 minutes of Easy Rider. We can watch it to the credits. I'm not entirely sure why I wanted you to watch this, other than I sort of feel like Wim Wenders saw this and was like, I don't know how, and I don't know why, and I don't know what, but I need more of this.
Yeah.
And The American Friend is
his answer.
Is maybe.
Yeah.
I certainly think the movie's in conversation with it, and I think that there's a moment, I think, right before this scene where Peter Fonda says to Dennis Hopper's character, we blew it. And basically meaning like, we thought we were trying to find the American dream, but all we are is drug dealers, you know? I don't know if you've seen the whole movie, but essentially they sell a bunch of cocaine, and then they go on a road trip, and then it ends. And this is, by the way, if you don't know how this movie ends, skip this part if you want to watch it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Have you seen Easy Rider?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we just watch it? And I mean, you can tell. Maybe you can help me understand why I wanted us to watch.
Maybe this will answer my question about obliquity that I put in the rundown. Because it seems it seems like you're gesturing towards Wim Wenders making an oblique reference, and the entire film is oblique. And so maybe this will help us get to an understanding of what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of what's happening is Tom Ripley is taking revenge for the Easy Rider characters.
Oh my God, amazing.
But I could be wrong.
I love that.
I even think this music is similar to kind of the folky music at the beginning of the film, which has acoustic guitar, but then also it's kind of minimalist, like Philip Glass strings.
Shadows, even the silver spoon, the handmade blade, the child's
This is Roger McGlynn singing a Bob Dylan song.
You understand, you know too soon. There is no sense in trying.
The lighting. Does the lighting seem familiar to you?
Yeah, right. They only
shot at dawn.
6 in the morning.
It could, threats, they bluff with scorn. Suicide remarks are torn from the fool's gold mouthpiece.
They're somewhere near New Orleans, going over tributaries of the Mississippi on motorcycles. It's gorgeous. Big yawn.
Temptation page flies out the door. You follow.
If Dennis Hopper was a dog, you'd have to say, that was a big yawn.
You feel to moan, but unlike before, you discover that you just be like one more person crying.
Sort of
that river.
Yeah, like river, harbor, infrastructure, like cranes.
So don't fear.
Yeah, that river reminds me of another river. I think that was the river.
Sound to your ear. It's all right, Ma. I'm only sighing.
Now we're in Greenfield. It's more agricultural. You also have, this is like the last scene, that feeling of having driven all night, even though apparently they just got up.
I miss movies like this.
We got two guys in the truck with a shotgun. Pull aside, we'll scare the hell out of them.
Why don't you get a haircut? What happened?
Apparently it was an accident. He was pointing the gun at him and it went off.
Billy.
Dennis Hopper is down.
I got him. Oh my God. I'm going for help, Billy. I got him. I'm gonna get him.
We better go back.
I'm gonna get him. We're
Covers him
ready
with the
now.
American flag jacket.
That berm, look at that levee.
That berm is familiar, isn't it?
The river
Fire.
flows.
Yeah.
It flows to the sea. Wherever that river goes.
So why did I play that?
Well, it's got the same like unexplained kind of like plot. It's one of those things where I've been digging around in E.M. Forrester again, aspects of the novel, and talking about the difference between plot and story. So story is just this happened and then this happened, and plot is this happened which led to this next thing happening.
Right.
And I think what's really interesting about both An American Friend and then the end of Easy Rider is the plot elements that perhaps we need are taken from us. And we're like,
Yep.
Why?
Or maybe we don't. I shared the quote from Roger Ebert, which I'll read it to you again, this is from Roger Ebert's review of The American Friend. He writes, "There's something cheerfully perverse about filming a thriller and then tossing out the parts that would help it make sense, comma. But Wim Wenders has a certain success with the method in The American Friend. He challenges us to admit that we watch and read thrillers as much for atmosphere as for plot.
Yeah. And, I love that you brought up Chekhov a little while ago because, like, I think we're in the same world. We're in this, like these are storytellers who...
Oh, there I go, talking about the wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like, what?
And the thing is that, like, they're non-condescending. So Dennis Hopper directing Easy Rider, Wim Wenders, Anton Chekhov, Shakespeare, like all of the good Shakespeare plays begin in the middle of a conversation where you're like, what? Yeah. Like, literally the first line of Hamlet is who's there. And, and it's like, I just think that, it's a great lesson to all of us that when we're creating, that the last thing we should do, and this is Coco Chanel also, take one thing out. Like, go back and remove something that you think is important, because that leaves a space for the reader or the watcher or the experiencer to make the story theirs. And, like, I'm wrestling with a lot of, like, who am I and what am I doing in this world? And, like, so, like, Ripley's kind of weird, like, search for meaning is the thing that's sort of, like, speaking to me, along with, like, Zimmerman's Zimmerman, before he meets Tom Ripley, knows exactly who he is. And I've
heard of you.
Yeah, right. Yes, it's great. Like, if only Zimmerman had managed to, like, I mean, he would have died anyway of his blood disease, but...
Yeah. Has he heard of him because of the plot, or has he heard of him because he's Tom Ripley, literary character? And he, in the same way that Dennis Hopper has a memory of Dennis Hopper at the end of Easy Rider.
Yeah.
I think maybe I've heard of you means I've read the Ripley books. Mm-hmm. I know you're not to be trusted. Well, or
something you said
not.
earlier, like, really hit for me, that, like, casting Dennis Hopper in this role, you don't just get Dennis Hopper, you get, like, the entire American zeitgeist, like, along with it. And I think that other great directors, for some reason, can see that in Dennis Hopper. And so, like, David Lynch in Blue Velvet is Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet is amazing. And you get this same, he has this way of bringing the epic to the everyday. And I think what you're talking about myth and mythicism is, like, it's sort of what you get with Dennis Hopper for some reason.
Yeah. And you can get it, like, when Quentin Tarantino makes Pulp Fiction, he can get it with Christopher Walken because more cowbell hasn't happened yet. And then even Catch Me, Spielberg can get it with Catch Me If You Can because it hasn't happened yet. Although in that one you get the two little mice monologue, the two little mice that fell into the pitcher of cream, and one struggled and gave up and died, and the other struggled and churned that cream into butter and climbed out. And it's like it's at the very edge of Walken saturation, but not quite. But now you just can't. He can't be in a movie without you just. It gets overdone. Yeah. In a way, it's sad. Although Christopher Walken had a pretty good run, so I think he's probably okay.
I mean, it's like,
but
when you finally get when you're somebody who wasn't conscious when The Deer Hunter came out, and then you grow up watching Christopher Walken move from Pulp Fiction
quietly,
into the Emperor of the Known Universe in Dune Part 2, and you're like, no. But when you see The Deer Hunter, you're like, holy shit. Yeah.
Here's this delicate boned, quiet, internal actor who none of those idiosyncrasies have been hatched yet. They're under the surface.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That actually sets up my trivia. So
mine is
I could go there
pretty close too. Quick little aside.
What if we have the same trivia?
No, maybe. I wonder. I was thinking about that today. I was like, when will Jesse and I have the
One
same
day
trivia?
that will happen. There will be some kind of trivia singularity.
Do you know what monologue Christopher Walken chose as his audition monologue to the Yale School of Drama?
I think I've heard this story before, but no, I don't.
He went in with "To Be or Not to Be."
Oh, ballsy.
Yeah, quite ballsy. Yeah.
I have a monologue for you. You may be familiar with it. Yeah. That's great.
I know.
That's great.
You're like that detail alone, sort of tells you like most of what you need to know about Christopher Walken. Not nearly all of it, because he does contain multitudes, but that's a good detail.
I guess the thing about it is that either he's incredibly arrogant or incredibly naive. It's one or the other.
From all the stories about it, from like the people who watched, they were like, it was completely fresh. Like he just did something new and like very believable. And so, probably a combination of arrogant, naive, and also being like, I think I have the chops for this. Yeah, I got this.
I got this.
Yeah.
I think I can do it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's respectful, and that's neither arrogant nor naive. That's the pivot point between the two, which is just, I think I can do it, and if I can, it would be amazing. All right. Well, we just talked about the significance of the decision to cast Dennis Hopper as Tom Ripley. But it turns out that Dennis Hopper was not Wim Wenders' first choice.
Oh my God.
As Tom Ripley.
Wow.
He actually approached a different actor/director who was not available, but suggested Dennis Hopper. So was the writer/director that he first sought out to play Tom Ripley A, Peter Fonda, B, Jack Nicholson, or C, John Cassavetes?
Oh my God. Nicholson feels like the bait and Cassavetes feels like the answer. It's 76. Is Chinatown 76 or 73? I can't remember. John Cassavetes.
Correct. You went with your gut and it worked.
Man, Cassavetes would be perfect.
Yeah.
So, as many great directors do, Wim Wenders casts himself in An American Friend. This is not my trivia, but do you know what character he plays?
I'm trying to remember what he looks like.
You don't see his face in this role, in this particular that he plays. In the film.
Maybe the doctor.
Not the doctor. He is the figure completely wrapped in bandages in the ambulance.
Oh no way!
That's Wim Wenders.
I assume that was one of the gangsters that had gotten thrown out of the train and survived.
Well, other than Wenders, how many successful film directors make appearances in An American Friend? And by successful, I mean like having directed an actual feature film that was actually brought to the public. Was it A, 3, B, 5, or C, 7 additional directors other than Wim Wenders?
All right. Well, I know about Nicholas Ray, and I know about, this is in addition.
This is in addition to Wim Wenders, and I guess since you already know, Dennis Hopper is also a director, so I guess it would be other than Wim Wenders and Dennis Hopper, are there
not
2, 4, or 6? If you do count
2,
Dennis
4,
Hopper,
or
it's 3, 5, and 7. But
got it.
Yeah.
2, 4, or 6. I was spending a little time with the cast. I think John Lilienthal is an actor. Wait, give me the numbers again.
if we're not counting Wim Wenders and Dennis Hopper, are there 2, 4, or 6 additional famous directors?
I'm going to go with B4.
There are a total of 6 additional directors.
Amazing.
So if you don't count Wim Wenders, there's 7, including Hopper.
Wow.
So Gerard Blaine, Sam Fuller, Nicholas Ray, Peter Lilienthal, Daniel Schmidt, and Jean Eustache. They all play the mobsters.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
They, in The Godfather Part 2, Francis Ford Coppola casts many directors, and they all play the senators in the commission.
That is wonderful.
Yeah,
that's great.
In the commission that's investigating, and Coppola tells the story that they asked him, like, well, why did you cast us? And he said, well, I wanted people who were comfortable with authority, who had a strong sense of presence, and were also a little bit awkward on camera.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, like, that's what the mobsters aren't great actors.
No.
Like, there's a real flatness.
No, but they're bizarre, and you do get this sense of like easy authority.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and is one of the directors the tall one who and is he the one who gets pulled into the French drain?
Yeah, and like cracks the back of his head.
And then he's like muttering or singing some song or something like that.
Again, very oblique,
It's probably a reference to some song or poem that he's saying. At one point, Dennis Hopper is singing "I Pity the Poor Immigrant," a Bob Dylan song.
Mm-hmm.
There are all these little.
I don't have enough. I'm not drenched in music enough to get all that stuff.
And one of the songs is the Kinks' "Nothing in the World Can Stop Me Worrying About This Girl," which also Wes Anderson has used.
It's a great effect.
Similar like mood piece.
Mm-hmm. Can we just briefly talk about color? Holy
oh my god!
crap.
Yeah, the saturation is incredible, and you can. I mean, it looks like Kodachrome. It looks like my grandfather's slides, from that era. It's clearly film, but there's just wonderful saturation, which to get in those days, you need to light things extremely well because you don't have a lot of. Nowadays, you can just dial up the saturation in post, and you couldn't do that then. You had to expose it.
Yeah. You had to do it for real. You had to make the stuff. You had to make the lights do the things that you wanted it to do.
Yeah, and if anything, you underexpose a little bit for saturation, because then things are a little bit darker, and then you can always lighten them in the dark room a little bit, or you can burn and dodge certain things in. But yeah, it's magnificently shot.
It's gorgeous.
Absolutely.
Like Ripley's like villa is just green. Like,
and the hotels that he stays in like in Paris also. And Europe still looks like that.
I know.
That's the other great thing is like the Europeans don't go around changing things unless they have to. I mean, there's plenty of modern architecture too, but like you go to Europe and stay in a hotel and it'll look like this movie, which is kind of great.
Yeah. It's fantastic. I'm so glad I watched it again. Because like now I'm like, oh, I will watch this again. Which
was the question I was about to ask you.
Yep. And
so you will watch it again. I think I will too. Yeah. I think this is one of those movies that I'll tune in from time to time the rest of my life. Similar to, I would say, also Minghella's Ripley and also the other version of Ripley's Game that is coming up.
It really, like, the guy who directed Drive, Nicholas Winding Refn, like, I was like, oh my goodness, he's seen this movie.
Yeah,
like, there's so much.
No, that's another film that's about friendship and mood more than plot. So what are we doing next?
Well, next up is Ripley Underground by Roger Spottiswoode.
Spottiswoode or Spottiswoode. I don't know if he may be a British director. I've never seen a movie by this director. I'll just warn you that I predict this might be the weakest of the Ripley films. It is not available to stream, although it is currently on YouTube. So you could probably find it there. I believe I have the DVD and I have a ripped version, so I'll try to find that and upload it for you. But everybody, check that out. That's coming up next. And thanks for listening. Upper Middlebrow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are desperately fighting in a water closet, or Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the guys you want in a water closet fight. I kind of like that one better.
Yeah,
Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the guys you want on your side in a water closet fight.
To be clear, I was imagining us on the same side, not fighting each other.
Sometimes the podcast gets very heated. And yeah, they don't actually fight in the water closet, as I recall.
It's true. Someone gets garroted in the water closet.
After he's been rendered unconscious.
He's been knocked out. Particularly brutal.
Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich.
And as a reminder, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Or you can enroll as a patron at the You Really, Really Like Us tier, which includes some one-on-one editorial time with one of us, the other, or both.
See you next time, everybody. Know where your passport is. Don't check if you're going to check the garrote or the silencer, be sure you lock the door.
Mm-hmm. Yep, lock those bathroom doors, folks.
Lock those bathroom doors.
It's just good manners.
It's good manners, and it can save your life. One of the things I love about that moment, too, is when Ripley kind of like comes out of nowhere to rescue him. He's got a cigarette between his teeth, too. And like the way that he beats that guy up, it just looks like he's slapping him.
Just slapping him, and then he's unconscious.
Slap.
Yeah, there's this, the actual, there's a real Keystone Cops-ish kind of feel to that particular moment where like Ripley or Zimmerman almost falls out of the train, and then the other one is helping them back in, but it sort of looks like he's also trying to throw him out. And it's just, and the mobsters are all kind of like quizzical and non-confrontational.
It's a little bit easier than it probably would have been. Right? Like the degree of sort of bumbling and amateurness that Jonathan and Ripley bring to that moment, they probably shouldn't have gotten away with it. Yeah. But it's very entertaining.
Yeah.
And we heartily recommend this movie, so we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah.
Leave us a comment.
It is inscrutable, but it's worth it.
I think we screwed it a bit. I think we did some scrooting.
We did some scrooting. We make the inscrutable scrutable.
We scroot.
We scroot. I am scroot.
We have scrooted. We scroot.
You scroot. We all scroot together.